You know, the way we understand and diagnose autism is going through a massive change. For decades, we've relied on this standard blueprint, but what happens when that blueprint is actually flawed? Today, we're going to dive into the cracks in that system and explore a new approach that could really change everything.
And really, it all boils down to this one central question. Is autism a disorder that needs to be fixed, or is it a fundamental difference that just needs to be understood? This simple question is right at the heart of a huge shift in how we're starting to think about the human mind.
Okay, so to get started, we've got to look at the official blueprint, the standard clinical way an autism diagnosis has been done for years.
So the official rule book, if you will, is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5. And it basically defines autism spectrum disorder by two key things: ongoing challenges in social communication and interaction, and the presence of restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior or interest.
So what does this actually look like for someone? How does this process even start? Well, it usually follows this pathway. There's an initial screening, maybe by a family doctor, which then leads to a referral to a specialist. And that specialist then conducts a whole series of in-depth assessments using specific tools.
And to do this, clinicians have these tools that are considered the gold standard. These include things like the ADOS-2, where a professional directly observes a person's behavior in a very structured social setting, and the ADIR, which is this really detailed interview with a parent or caregiver about the person's entire developmental history.
Okay, but here's the thing. This blueprint, as solid and established as it seems, has some pretty serious cracks. So let's take a look at where this system can really start to fail.
I mean, what happens when these super carefully designed, standardized tools just miss people? What if the very act of being observed changes the behavior that's being looked for in the first place?
And this brings us to a huge issue, something called camouflaging or masking. See, the screening tools are on the lookout for really specific, often obvious traits. But what happens is that a lot of people, especially girls and women, learn to hide or suppress those traits. They might imitate what they think is typical eye contact, or they'll develop interests that are seen as more socially acceptable. And the result? A delayed diagnosis, or sometimes a completely missed one.
And look, this isn't just a theory or some anecdotal evidence. A major study in 2023 from the National Institutes of Health put one of the most popular screening tools out there, the Autism Spectrum Quotient, or AQ, right under the microscope, specifically looking for gender bias.
And what they found, honestly, it's staggering. Get this. Out of all 50 questions on this widely used screening tool, only 2 of them were found to be genuinely gender neutral. Just 2. The other 48? They all showed a significant bias.
So what does a bias like that actually mean in the real world? Well, the study found that women were more likely to say yes to questions about social skills, while men were more likely to say yes to questions about restricted behaviors. Now, this doesn't mean women aren't autistic. It means the tool itself is built to measure different presentations of the traits, which creates this baked-in bias from the start.
So all of this is leading to a really fundamental shift in perspective, moving away from this idea of autism as a deficit and moving toward understanding it simply as a difference.
And this quote, it just perfectly captures the heart of this new way of thinking, the neurodiversity affirming movement. The entire framing of the conversation just flips. The question is no longer what's wrong, it's now what's different about this person's way of interacting with the world and how can we support that?
Okay, so that's the philosophy, but what does it actually look like in practice? Let's break down the affirming approach, a much more human-centered model for assessment.
Let's put these 2 models side by side because the difference is huge. The traditional, deficit-based model has a goal to fix or cure what it sees as a condition. The clinician is in charge, and the report is all about what's wrong, the deficits. But then you have the neurodiversity affirming model. Its goal is to understand and support the person. The whole process is collaborative with the individual and their family, and the report? It highlights their strengths and their unique way of being.
You can see how this way of thinking just completely transforms the whole assessment process. It kicks off with a collaborative intake, where concerns are reframed right from the start. From there, it's about getting a truly holistic view of the person, writing reports that focus on their unique profile, and then giving feedback that actually empowers them with real practical strategies for accommodation.
And this brings us to one of the most powerful and, I think, beautiful ideas in the affirming model. This idea of reframing challenges and strengths as just 2 sides of the very same coin. The crucial idea here is pretty simple, but it's a game changer. A trait that might be a challenge in one context can actually be a huge strength in another. It's all about perspective.
Think about it like this. What might look like a struggle with emotional regulation could really be coming from a place of heightened sensitivity, which is an incredible strength when it comes to things like empathy. Or the person who has a really hard time in a traditional, rigid classroom might be the very same person who absolutely excels in a creative, hands-on environment.
So, the big takeaway here is this massive shift away from a deficit mindset. The goal is to embrace the idea that neurological differences aren't flaws to be corrected, but are actually an integral and valuable part of human diversity. And all of this really leaves us with one final and I think vital question. It stops being about how we can make a person change to fit our world. The real challenge, the real question is, how do we build a world that fits the person?